Uh, so thanks everybody for joining us this morning or this afternoon, or in the case of Joe Wang, 11 o'clock at night. So the session this morning is going to includes a number of different speakers. And what we did was we actually put the whole program right into the middle of our website for coal-fired power plant decisions. And so this webinar this morning, we are going to be relying on the president of DSUA, the president of the partnerships and so forth for Sox-NOx in India, and then intelligence information and so forth that is in our various coal-fired boilers. And this is a very interactive meeting, so please feel free to interject your thoughts, questions, whatever. And we do want to make it a discussion rather than simply a series of presentations. So we're going to start out with Jerry Hunt, and he's going to update us on what's going on at DSUA. And then Mr. Dalvi of
तुम्ही ज्या व्यक्तीशी बोलत आहात त्यांनी तुमच्या कॉलला होल्डवर ठेवलं आहे. कृपया लाईनवरच राहा. The person you are speaking with has put your call on hold. Please stay on the line. आप जिस व्यक्ति से बात कर रहे हैं उसने आपकी कॉल को होल्ड पर रखा है. कृपया लाइन पर बने रहें. तुम्ही ज्या व्यक्तीशी बोलत आहात त्यांनी तुमच्या कॉलला होल्डवर ठेवलं आहे. कृपया लाईनवरच राहा. The person you are speaking with has put your call on hold. Please stay on the line. आप जिस व्यक्ति से बात कर रहे हैं उसने आपकी कॉल को होल्ड पर रखा है.
Yes, there's a background going on. Hi, this is Dalvi with Mission Energy Foundation.
तुम्ही ज्या व्यक्तीशी बोलत आहात त्यांनी
Should I redial? There's background music, you know.
I think
The person you are speaking with has put your call on hold. Please stay on the line.
Yes, that's right. That's me, Mr. Dalvi from Mission Energy Foundation in India. Let me recall and rejoin. I think some background noise that's going on. Am I audible?
Yes,
gentlemen, can you hear me now?
You definitely are. I think we probably have somebody else that was at the
yes.
So you're coming in fine there. So I was just starting the introduction. I'm going to go to the answers to your questions in a minute there, but you'll be the second speaker after Jerry Hunt here.
Okay, and, perfect.
And for the others that are on the line here, this is Mr. Dalvi's picture here, and these are the questions that we're going to ask him. Then we're going to be talking to Ravi Krishnan of Krishnan Associates about the Indian market. He was delayed. He was in Malaysia. He's trying to get back to his Mumbai office, but he may or may not be able to communicate because he may be on an airplane, in which case I'm going to go through some of the market numbers for the Indian market. Joe Wang is on the conference with us here, and he's a fountain of information about dry scrubbing. They are the largest dry scrubber manufacturer worldwide. John Kirsch of NACE is going to summarize the program. That's a very impressive program that they've undertaken to improve all the operations of their dry scrubbers at several different plants. Scott Affoldt will be making a presentation about predictive analytics and tailored to dry scrubbing systems. So I think that'll be quite useful. The consultants at Burns & McDonnell have provided some talking points, and we'll be pulling those up as well and discussing them. The Indian valve manufacturers are confident that they have all the valves to supply the Sox-NOx in India, and whether and is there anybody from that group on the phone with us here? No. So the very from L&T, VLAN, and several others will want the opportunity, which we might do next week, to really talk about the valves for scrubbers and things. So
right.
So basically, what we're concerned about here is that a number of people that wanted to participate today weren't able to, and that we may even have more people who wanted to participate in joining us than the 26 person limit. We probably, knowing how much interest there was, we probably should have set the limit higher. But what we decided to do instead is that first of all, we're going to have a link to the recording, so anybody, we are recording this right now, even with the beeps from the phone.
Yeah, Bob, is there a way that you can mute whoever that is? It looks like it's caller number 1.
And who would that be?
Yeah, Ross is. I think you're on the phone.
Yeah, I'm trying to track him down. I haven't been able to mute that one though.
Can you just disconnect it?
Yeah, I'm not sure where caller 01. How do you see caller 01?
Well, it's the letter C is on the screen that I see. It's everyone has initials, but it's just C. And then when it flashes, I see caller 01.
Okay. Let me try muting everybody real quickly and then unmute Bob. Hold on.
Muted. Unmuted.
Bob, can you speak now?
Yeah, I can speak now. So that's a good idea. I'll speak for a while, then we'll go back on again. So you solve the problem that way. Good point. So the question would be, should we have some webinars next week? They can be pretty much impromptu. They can be just, for instance, if we do one on instrumentation, NVEA is an exhibitor or at least participating in both of the conferences, and so are a lot of other companies that are one way or another involved. So we could have NVEA and Emerson, ABB, or Ariba, and discuss both the dry scrubber and the Indian market. The same thing with fabric folders and bags, with a whole slew of companies that are involved in both of the conferences. We just talked about valves. Fujikun is a DSUA sponsor and providing a lot of knowledge that has been used by the industry. But the Indian valve companies are forming an association that I think is being launched here next month, and they are going to be working with us to make sure that everyone has confidence that the valves are going to be available for all these systems. Then we have a very good analysis by Sumitomo SHIFW on the Indian opportunity to use CFB scrubbers with all sorts of cost data. And I do want to show that at some point in time, because I think that could be the basis for a discussion about circulating fluid bed scrubbers versus wet scrubbers. And people like Joe Wang, who I was just on the phone with, pointing out that the CFB scrubbers may have less of a corrosion problem than the SDA on some of the, we were just, for instance, talking about a coke plant problem. So these are where we would be talking that sort of thing on scrubbers. And then whether we just limit it to lime and limestone, but Yara is going to be a participant in the Sox-NOx, and they're somebody that we work with pretty closely, and they're very active around the world, supplying the urea and the ammonia and things that are needed. So we could do one on chemicals. So that so that's basically where we stand. Are there any questions before we actually go on to Jerry's presentation? So the Jerry Hunt is the president of DSUA, and So we're going to bring up his PowerPoint. And Ross, what's the situation? Or are we just going to open it up and have? Okay, so we have to unmute Jerry at this point.
Yeah, he's unmuted.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we're just going to unmute one person at a time. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Bob?
Yeah, we sure can, Jerry.
All right, thank you.
So yeah, I can put this in the slideshow. I can put this from the beginning and go that way on it there. Okay.
Sure thing. Yeah, thank you. This is appreciate the chance to give a quick update. We have the 2019 dry scrubber users group that's going to be taking place the week after the next here in Kansas City, Missouri, in the United States. This is a nonprofit organization, the Dry Scrubber Users Association, and this conference is going on well over 10 years now that this has been ongoing, and it's been accumulation of various dry scrubbing technology that's ranged from spray dryers to circulating dry scrubbers to even some dry sorbent injection discussion. So going to give a quick synopsis update of the kind of the agenda, the content, everything that's going to be coming up here in a week and a half. So you can go to the next slide, Bob. So just kind of running through the agenda to give everyone here involved get an idea of how the conference breaks down and who's been involved. You can kind of see, I'm not going to necessarily name everyone out, but again, since this is a nonprofit, I think it's great to acknowledge all the folks, the sponsors and the exhibitors. So we've kind of called them out by name. These folks help make this conference happen, as well as the folks that attend. So I think it's great to give them a little bit of credit for helping make this happen. So the week of September 9th is when the conference is going to take place, and we've been starting off the last 3 years or so. We've been doing sort of a pre-conference golf tournament where some folks who can arrive early enough, we all kind of get together, and I think right now the number is about 19 of us. Just go out and have a round of golf and sort of make a little tournament out of this as a way to just kind of get to know some of the folks that are going to be there, put them together in a foursome. Monday is usually when a lot of people are actually flying in, so we do start off having kind of a welcome reception that evening, just to sort of get folks together and reconvene, since there are a lot of folks that are kind of repeat attendees, and get a chance for the new people to meet folks meet some folks there. And then the real content starts on Tuesday the 10th. So we're having a keynote talk from one of the American Electric Power major utility, one of their plant managers from the Welsh station. Donnie Duffy is going to be giving a talk, and it's in relation to kind of the theme this year is work smarter, not harder, and kind of touching upon how times have changed for both the power plants, but as well as we see, younger engineers, sort of the millennial terminology gets thrown out there, and the older experienced folks out and kind of retiring, that whole transition of how can we kind of marry those concepts together, and again, recognize these some of these technical issues as the coal-fired generation, operations have changed, and turn these problems into opportunities. So, that's kind of the essence of this year's theme. So Tuesday consists of really just some technical presentations, as well as in the evening, some breakout sessions. So the technical sessions through the day consist of we have 8 technical papers, and it's a solid mix of, some vendor presentations as well as some plant reports. So it's about 50-50. And then Tuesday we have the breakout sessions, and the general content, some may vary from session to session, but usually there's 3 or 4, whether they're end users or vendors that are pertinent to each subject matter. We'll give sort of a brief talk in each session, and then it's really intended to be an organic conversation, some panel sessions. So Tuesday we're going to have breakout sessions about performance optimization, scrubber maintenance, particulate, and filtration. So really just trying to touch upon some themes and general topics that are kind of near and dear to the folks that are there at the conference. And throughout the day, obviously, we have breaks and meals and opportunities for folks to kind of network and just kind of chat. But lastly, the in the evening, we have a sponsored networking event, and we're going to do that at a local Topgolf in the area as well. So another opportunity to just, you've had a chance to hear some people talk and meet some people, just an opportunity to catch up and network a little bit more. Next slide. And then Wednesday, we kind of break it up a little bit so everyone's not kind of sitting still for, multiple days in a row. And this day really consists of plant tours as well as some social activities, implement some networking and fun, and then some vendor exhibiting. And this year we've got 3 plants that kind of all bring something a little different. The Hawthorne station is an opportunity for folks to come out and see a spray dryer absorber system, walk the unit down, talk to folks at the plant. These guys will also give a plant report at the conference. And also the Iatan station, now that has a spray dryer evaporator, so it's a spray dryer absorber technology. But the little difference here, I think that makes this year interesting, is this is used they have a wet scrubber, so they're using their blowdown from their wet scrubber, and the spray dryer evaporator is a means to take a slipstream of hot gas and evaporate that blowdown, so they're not having to use a water treatment system to treat their blowdown. So this is an opportunity, especially in the States, as folks are dealing with potentially new regulations on their blowdown coming down the pipeline. This could be a potential solution if folks are interested in that. And then lastly, the Nearman Creek station is a circulating dry scrubber. So again, a chance to walk that down and talk to folks at the plant and ask questions and see things firsthand. And then the evening is a vendor exhibiting. So we have some vendors that also are involved, and they'll have booths, and this is an opportunity to kind of walk around and see what these vendors have to offer and are exhibiting, and just, again, another opportunity to kind of network and see what's out there for the folks that are attending. Next slide, Bob. And I won't run through all this, but you guys can get a feel of, as of yesterday, this was the list of folks that had committed to exhibiting for the Wednesday night vendor session. So next slide. Okay, and then Thursday is similar format as Tuesday. So we're going to have some main technical sessions. Again, we've got technical papers, and it's a pretty solid split between, vendor discussions as well as plant reports. And then again, in the evening, we have more breakout sessions. Again, similar format as what I discussed on Tuesday. And the subjects will be around really reagents, so hydrated lime, quicklime, and then another session about corrosion and erosion, and then atomizers and injectors. And then to kind of close out the conference, there's going to be an evening reception that's hosted, sponsored by the association, to just one last chance for everyone to get together and kind of have some fun and network a little bit more. So next slide. And again, there's some additional sponsors that are, kind of taking an extra effort to be involved in the conference to support certain aspects of it. Next slide. And this is the last one, just for folks who can attend, or even for any folks that are, listening in that, maybe it doesn't make sense to fly to the States. We make our content available. So, folks that register, pay to register and attend the conference, they have access for a year to get the old content and view the presentations. Now, there is also an option where if you can't make it, but you love access to this, you can pay for an annual membership through the association. And then to access it, you'll basically get a login, and you can go to our website that's listed here and just click to access the PDF presentation. And we are talking about making some form of like a summary table of contents. So if people are interested in this concept but would like to see what's available, try and make some access to at least what the content is on the website, so that you can kind of make that decision if this is going to be valuable for you or not, if you can't attend the conference and would like access to the content. And that's all I've got, unless anyone has any questions, but that's just a quick synopsis of, what we've got planned for this year's Dry Scrubbers Association.
Yeah,
that's great.
I'd just like to add that you and I have talked about, for those people who can attend, and for the members, that we might be able to package something with quarterly webinars that take advantage of referencing some of the archives for discussions and so forth, and that, at no additional charge for whatever you're charging for that access just to the archives, that it might be a more interactive process if we had the webinars and things too. So that's just in a discussion stage, but I guess that is something, is it not, Jerry, that we're discussing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good way to, kind of keep this, this is an annual conference, and, we don't want people to forget about it. And it's a good way to try and keep the conversation going, like kind of you said, as a quarterly basis. So, and I think, depending on the discussion and the feedback, that could also be some inspiration to help us, try to figure out what kind of content makes sense, since really this is a pretty fluid process. And, we're still finalizing content as of a couple of weeks ago. So it gives us a lot of opportunity to try and listen to what folks are interested in, and hopefully try to mold the content a little bit more to shape it around what, the folks want to hear. And that will be a pertinent, topics of discussion. So yeah, I think that's something we're definitely planning to do for leading up to the 2020 presentation or conference.
And I think I kind of skipped around. Whoops, I didn't want to get back to this, but what I think maybe it's appropriate to kind of change the, let's see here. What I wanted to do was to pull up, that basically where it is, there is, at this point, maybe to go to the dry scrubber improvement, then we'll come back to Mr. Dalvey here. But as long as we're pursuing this, I think maybe we'll just briefly, John, which is, I think what we're showing here is the high quality and durability, because talked to John earlier this week, and he pointed out that one of the best papers on this subject is one that's several years old. So John, would you kind of like to comment along the lines that we talked about there?
Jen?
Yeah, he may not John Kirsch.
Not John.
Yeah, John Kirsch would have been. So he's the one that made this presentation here, sent us the information, and but I think, as Jerry's pointing out, there's a lot of these papers that use 8 technical papers. Each of the days is going to have this quality of information to it, and in this particular case.
I don't know if you can hear me. This is Paul Brandt with Burns McDonnell.
Yeah.
I can speak a little bit, if John's not available, to a little bit about some of his presentations and what they've looked at just from a high level that is maybe worth just touching on it for a minute.
That would be great.
John?
Yeah,
so that slide right there with the bar chart, that's something that I know John and his team have been chasing, which everybody does, which is stoichiometry, how much reagent you're using. So this is actually a pretty cool chart that shows where they line up against other units, and obviously they're below the industry average. And they may have even improved this since then, because they're really trying to work how much hydrated lime reagent they're using versus what's required for, of course, perfect stoichiometry is 1.0. Nobody achieves that, but at least not in dry scrubbing. So, whatever you are above that is costing you money on the reagent. So I know they've continued to work through that. They have employed dew point monitoring. So one of the key parameters is your outlet temperature from your scrubber. Obviously, the lower you go, the better your reagent usage, but you don't want to go too low, or you'll get into the corrosion realm downstream, which is something else that John and his team I know have worked through in past discussions and presentations, really chasing, finding good materials and finding that balance between improving your reagent utilization, using a dew point monitor to set your approach temperature above saturation, but not going too low and then creating a corrosion problem. And I know Jerry can speak to that. I think approach temperature and dew point monitoring, coupled with reagent usage and corrosion, are two of the biggest topics that are always coming up with these systems every year. So anyhow, that's just kind of a couple things I know that John's presented on before. I think they've also looked at different bags in their bag house. That may be later in the presentation. But yeah, those are two that John's really worked hard on his team, the corrosion and the reagent utilization.
So we definitely want to hear more about the bags and too, and then maybe we can learn a bit more about that for the meeting that we could maybe schedule next week on the bags and so forth there. But but here is this presentation, by the way, is going to be available. But I'll just one last query as to whether and Ross, would you have been able to unmute John there?
I unmuted everybody, so anybody who was on should have been able to talk. So.
Oh, okay. So I guess maybe John was on earlier, and maybe we lost him somewhere along the.
I don't see him in the list of current attendees.
Oh, okay. No. So anyway, we appreciate his activity there. So I think what we'll do then is we'll move on. I think, Mr. Dalvi, that maybe the best thing is to pull up the written answers that you provided, and then just have you verbalize with that in the background. How's that?
Right. Sounds good. In fact, I would like to answer them. If you can pull up, Bob, the program agenda, which I had sent this morning with the Sox-NOx conference.
Okay.
A bit about Mission Energy Foundation.
Okay.
We are a non-profit organization, and we were a group which was formed almost a decade back, 10 years back, by our Director General, Mr. Ashwin Kumar Khatri, under the aegis and the blessings of the former President of India, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, is also a renowned scientist, and we are one of our beloved leaders here in India. So with Dr. Kalam's blessings, this mission was formed primarily with issues like gasification, coal gasification, waste to energy, environment norms, primarily Sox-NOx being the latest entrant over the last 4 years, and subjects like water optimization for thermal power plants. So we cater to the Indian energy sector. Am I audible? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello?
You're coming in very strong. Yeah.
Right, sir. So the conference is India's only platform focusing on environmental issues. This would be our 4th edition of the Sox-NOx 2019 conference, expo, as well as awards. So what we are planning that the conference day 1 would highlight more on SOX, day 2 on NOx. I would not deep dive as to who's going to present, but we have a galaxy of sponsors as well. The expo is more of a one-on-one meeting sessions at the exhibits. It's like a buyer and seller meet with more inclusive discussions on the pain areas, which they can do at the exhibit. Then finally, at the end of day 2, we have reward and recognition in terms of awards in 10 categories. Right, Bob? That was just a matter-of-fact explanation from me. The brochures have all the details, so I'm open to questions from you.
Yeah, I think maybe in a few minutes I'm going to pull up our newsletter where we went through some of the things that are going to be happening there. So maybe, do you want to address these other questions here too about your role and so forth there? Yeah.
Yes, that sounds good. So how do I begin with the first question?
Yeah, with your background in international law and lengthy experience with strategic partnerships and alliances, do you assess the potential for Indian air pollution system and equipment suppliers? How do you assess it with international companies?
Right. Yes. In an international conference, I would like to reserve the statements more towards India, because here, from the legal point of view, environmental law is long in India. What I mean is the legal compliance norms in India follows the old practice maxim of polluter pays principle. So the emission standards are governed by our Central Pollution Control Board or the State Pollution Control Board, NCEA, which is the Central Electricity Authority Board. Now, in our experience over the last 4 editions of the Sox-NOx, I mean the last 3, this would be the 4th, the regulator tone at the top is clear, which if you feel compliance is expensive, try non-compliance, which means that they are ready to penalize for all those companies who have not implemented FGDs or not adhering to the emission standards and the required specifications and domain. And this has pressed the panic buttons for many thermal power plants. And that's the reason why they feel it's a business imperative for technologies in FGD, SCR, and SCNR. And that's the reason there's a growing partnership with Indian air pollution systems and pollution control suppliers to partner with Indian and international companies. Now, the feature here is that the ministry officials have extended the deadline to 2022. Last year, it was 2017. So there has been a bit of a myth around as to why it has been extended. But I think that's primarily got to do with certain PSU units who are not able to adhere to the compliance deadline for SOX and NOx implementation. The challenge, however, Bob, here lies in policies for DNOx, DNOx regulations by the regulators. There is a speculation that norms may get diluted for certain PSU plants, resulting in delayed orders for certain vendors. But there have been a silver lining with various vendors receiving orders for DNOx as well. Yes, Bob.
And so as part of your role, liaisoning with government of India policies.
Hey, Bob. Well, Bob, that's yes. Yes, please. Hello.
Hey, Bob.
Yes, Bob, I can hear you. Hi, Ravi. Please tell me.
I have a flight to board in about 20-25 minutes. I was just trying to see if I could just finish part of my section a little bit, and maybe if you want me to jump in next week, I could do that. But I won't be able to share screens. But I just wanted to see if I'm needed today, or I should try.
No. Why don't we just interrupt for a few minutes here, and please proceed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Ravi, please.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce myself and give you a little background, and then just hit on some highlights on the scrubber market, the FGD market in India. Now, my name is Ravi Krishnan. I've been in the air pollution control business for about 20 plus years, primarily operating out of the United States, and have been involved in NOx and SOx and have had several projects that I've been involved with. I used to run a burner company myself. Developed an SCR injector that we eventually sold to Tenneco in 2009 for automotive applications. So there's been some history in air pollution control. In addition to that, my involvement with India has been really has gone over 15 years. I was working very closely with the Adani Group and Tata Power for almost 7 years, bringing in expatriates to commission and start up their supercritical power plants. So a number of Americans who actually worked in India to start up and commission some of the large supercritical units were, in fact, worked under my company or were sent from my organization. So we had a lot of interaction and also worked directly with some of the chairmen and promoters of these different groups. So the interaction has been very solid with India, and the other engagement was fairly active in the norms itself, as we were supported by companies around the world to help educate the Central Pollution Control Board and the Ministry of Environment and Forest entities at a time when SCR and FGD were at its very infancy stages, just in terms of technology and cost and so on. So that's kind of a little bit of a background. I think Bob McElwain had me here to talk a little bit about the FGD market, and I would like to just quickly go through and give you some highlights. And perhaps if you have any questions, you can reach me directly by mail. My company website is krishnanainc.com. That is KRISHNANINC.com. My email address is ravi@krishnanainc.com. That's RAVI@KRISHNANINC.com. So with that, let me just quickly run through this. You may hear some background noise, but I'm here at a quiet place, so hopefully there should not be any interference. So all of you know about this SO2 regulations that have come about, and as Mr. Dalvi just mentioned, the deadlines have also been extended. They've been extended to 2022 because a number of units, at the time when the regulations came about, it was unbelievable. Some of them barely had 6 months or 12 months basically comply. And as most of you know, you didn't have SCR. It's very difficult to install an SCR or an FGD in such a short time period. The other big issue that Indian plants always faced was that Indian coals have very high ash content, and a lot of these technologies have not really been proven in such high ash content fuels. So there was reason for the Indian utilities to kind of challenge the technology capability and its applicability in the Indian context. And the third reason, obviously, is cost. No one thought that none of the utilities and the IPPs ever thought that the extent of cost would be so much, and a number of Indian power purchase agreements do not have a rate-based pass-through clause. So there is a total ambiguity on how the cost would actually be recovered. So there were various reasons, and many of the IPPs went back and asked for relief, and therefore the deadlines have been extended to 2022, and some of the plants have to comply before that. So it's a staggering deadline because they don't want all plants to be shut down during a certain period and cause upset the grid. So that's in nutshell as far as the regulations are concerned. So in terms of the market size for FGD, as you know, a number of plants are already being tendered. A number of plants are already purchasing FGDs, and therefore, the market is very much in its is quite vibrant. Now, as you know, pollution control markets around the world are very soft at this point because coal is not a preferred fuel anymore, and many of the more mature markets around the world already have FGDs and SCRs and equipment. So India is very fortunate that there are a lot of vendors that have descended upon India. Thereby, there's actually a tremendous plethora of vendors who are actually bidding projects, which is actually causing the prices to come down. So you're seeing a fairly a buyer's market where, in fact, fleets like NTPC and others have embarked on reverse auctions to actually award FGD projects. So coming back to the market size, we estimate that roughly there are about 180,000 megawatts of FGDs of units that actually require some kind of SO2 control. It could be an FGD, or it could be a DSI, or it could be, but it requires some kind of an FGD control. Our estimate is that about 141 gigawatts of units would actually have to install an FGD by 2022. Going by India's track record, will it get extended again? Perhaps yes, because things have always flipped. But things have, from an enforcement standpoint, since things have gotten a little tougher, India has repeatedly, been supportive of the COP21 and all the other, global environmental standards that have been coming about.
Absolutely.
And therefore, so roughly about 141 gigawatts are likely to have FGDs by 2022, of which we estimate about 40 gigawatts or so have already been awarded, and another 100 gigawatts are yet to be awarded or are in a stage of doing assessment through various AE firms like TCE and like Fichtner and like Mecon and like DCU and a number of other companies who have actually specialized in this area, right? The typical emission numbers for Indian units is roughly about 1,200 to 1,000 to 1,400 milligrams per nm cube. About 80% of the impacted units burn high ash Indian fuels, less than 1% sulfur content in the fuel. Almost 100% of all the units have ESPs. There are very few bag houses in Indian units, and it's primarily an ESP market. And the average construction period for an FGD is roughly about 20 to 24 months, closer to 24 months. Now, of the 141 gigawatts that we estimate that need an FGD, and of the remaining 100 gigawatts that are yet to be awarded and are in various early stages of planning, we expect our calculations show that around 70% of that are less than 600 megawatts. The reason I bring this up is the topic is dry scrubbers. The largest dry scrubber that has been installed anywhere in the world using a single train scrubber design is 520 megawatts, which is the Dry Fork project by Sumitomo Foster Wheeler SFW, and historically and conventionally it has been seen that dry scrubbers or semi-dry systems are basically most effective, cost effective also under 600 megawatts. So they are designed for under 600 megawatts, and there are roughly about 70 gigawatts of capacity that is out there. That is basically unawarded projects that are less than 600 megawatts. Now, from that, if you deal out the coastal units, and I've taken out the coastal units because the coastal units are basically more likely to go with seawater scrubbers, and many of them also use some very high sulfur fuels. So if you deal them out, then you're talking, and if you deal out the units that are more than 30 years old, because these units are not likely to do anything because they cannot justify the cost. You're talking about another 15 gigawatts that are out. So you're talking anywhere between 55 and 60 gigawatts of opportunity that could be ripe for a dry scrubbers. In addition to that, you also have a number of captive power plants. Very hard to track. These are basically plants that have industrial processes, on-site steam and power generation, and these units basically constitute, almost another 300 to 400 captive power plants that are actually subject to another set of regulations and that are being investigated on a case-by-case basis, depending on the size of the unit, to basically install, additional controls. So this is kind of in nutshell what the market opportunity is. I mean, the usual suspects there are a number of state board companies, not so much the NTPCs of the world who have larger units, but a lot of the state board companies who have a number of units that are between 200 and 600 megawatts. A lot of industrial plants that have units of those size, all of which, if they're in the right size range, operating with the right load factors and capacity factors and so on and so forth, are likely to put in an FGD. Now, like any other market, anywhere in the world, a number of the cost impact of these are very significant, and in many cases there is no clear capital recovery process established. The plants are actually appealing with the various regulators to try and see if they can get any relief, either through a pass-through clause or either through a slight modification to the regulatory standard itself, maybe increasing the limit, or maybe even pushing out compliance dates. So there's a lot of different things that are being talked about on a case-by-case basis. So that's kind of in nutshell. And in terms of pricing, excuse me, the average price of an wet FGD system is roughly about, and I'm talking average prices because some of the early projects had very low prices, and some of the later projects have had much higher prices, and it's also a function of the size of the unit that has an impact on a cost per megawatt number. But it is roughly coming to about in US dollars, it's roughly coming to about $60,000 to $65,000 per megawatt for a wet FGD system.
Yeah,
so that is roughly about 50 lakhs for a wet FGD system. And as you know, the dry system is anywhere from 60 to 70% the cost of a wet FGD system from a capital cost standpoint. So that is roughly about $40,000 to $45,000 per megawatt, which is somewhat what you also see for a seawater scrubber system. So now you can make your own calculations based on the market size as to what the potential could be for a dry scrubber system if all of them under 600 megawatts and that are not coastal units or those that are more than 30 years old adopt a dry system. Then finally, in terms of the ongoing operating costs, the biggest issue has always been the cost of lime versus limestone and so on and so forth, and whether the capex, even though the capex is lower, does the continued opex of a dry system eventually catch up and render it as being unfavorable? But in India, that is obviously, it's the same issues that face India as well. So what are the biggest concerns in general concerning FGD adoption? Obviously, it is the legislation on pass-through costs. That is clearly an issue. The availability of high-quality limestone, for a wet system, the short timeline. In many units, there's not enough space. These are all old units, and therefore there's not enough space for a retrofit. Many of them were not designed with enough space for an FGD system, and then there's also many of them are old units. I mean, a lot of Indian plants are actually more than 25 to 30 years old. So clearly, they may not be motivated to do anything. Secondly, as far as limestone is concerned, it's found all over India, but the good quality limestone is found in certain states like Rajasthan and in Meghalaya, and transporting the limestone, especially from Meghalaya, is not exactly easy. It's a northeastern state, which is kind of a lot of hilly terrain, and transport connectivity is not very great. The purity of Indian limestone is also suspect. It's less than 80%. That means the gypsum quality is also poor, and therefore the gypsum offtake infrastructure is not yet very mature. Even though some of the initial plants may structure a gypsum agreement, long term they may just have to give it free of charge, because we think there'll be a lot of gypsum coming at pretty poor quality, and they may find it easy to just give it away as opposed to landfilling it. And the hydrated lime, like anywhere else in the world, is roughly about 4 to 5 times the cost of a limestone scrubber. So the average cost of limestone per kilogram is roughly about 2 rupees per kg, and that's about 5 times the amount for lime. Then other things, some of the things that people will face in terms of challenges for a dry FGD is availability of lime, experience on large units. So we expect that this would be a market that is for less than 600 megawatts. The retrofit space available for a bag filter, I mean, a lot of them don't have that space. There's also been some history about the bag filter performance on Indian fuels. So
yes, Ravi.
that has to also be addressed. And then there may be some high ops power issues, questions related to that. So these are some of the challenges. But like everywhere else, this is a very cost-sensitive market, and it's an extremely cost-sensitive market, and therefore having that tremendous capex advantage and it's going to mean that dry units are going to have a distinct advantage, especially for some of the smaller units, less than 600 megawatts. So that's kind of in nutshell, Bob, what I wanted to just talk about, and just leave it at that for now.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ravi. That's a very good contribution. Mr. Davi, would you like to make some comments on that as well?
Right. I wouldn't agree with Ravi less. In fact, he has highlighted the huge potential. In fact, as I'd like to also add with regards to the limestone, which is a crucial element for FGDs, we have organizations like Carmu, Sigma Minerals, who'd be joining us at the Sox-NOx conference in India. And Bob, with your permission, I was wondering if I can club the second last and the last question together,
Surely,
so that we could have some more content-oriented presentations from our other participants as well. So the second last question, which you had essentially posed to us, is the Sox-NOx 2019 attendance. You don't want to read it, or do I read your question, Bob?
You don't have to. No, I think we have it in front of us here. Why don't you just go ahead and answer what's going to be?
Right. So you asked whether the Sox-NOx 2019 attendance has been growing steadily each year. What is the expectation for the quantity and quality of information exchange this year? Well, the Sox-NOx 2000 participants this year in attendance are mainly attending for questioning the regulators. We'd be having officials from CPCB, CEA, as well as the ministry officials. We have our guest, Honorable Union Minister for Environment, Shri Prakash Javadekar, who has promised to be part of the August gathering. The participants have a lot to learn. There are certain challenges which Ravi did highlight with regards to the PSU plants, and who are 30 years old, and they are waiting for new plants with new FGDs, so that they don't have to spend more on the operations and maintenance, given the extended deadline of 2022. Now, we have seen this year, hello, Bob, we have seen this year there has been a little bit of a challenge from the Chinese market. There were certain reservations and frustrations among solution providers from China who were part of my conference in 2018 related to India's policy guidelines, which may affect the participation from China this year. We had Shanghai Electric last year, we had FIDA, we had various other groups from China, CNCEC, who had participated last year. So this year we may have their participation as a delegate rather than as a sponsor or an exhibitor. So I am supremely confident that the content on this year's presentation, in continuation from last year, will focus on the way forward for Sox-NOx in India and Southeast Asia. As I said, that the value proposition is more on content-led presentations, more on policies, and of course, at the end of the seminar, we are going to have some more awards and recognitions in the form of awards, which will be handed over by the chief guest. I'd like to also mention that we are very thankful as India's only platform being endorsed by the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, Government of India, Ministry of Power, Coal and Renewable Energy, Ministry of Science and Technology, and also a special note of thanks to NVIA for supporting this conference as one of our principal sponsors, NTPC as a powering sponsor. I'd like to add here something more about our knowledge sponsor, Adage Automation. They're actually the distributors of Siemens. Bob, are you hearing me? Siemens.
Yes.
So they would be discussing more with regards to Siemens, and I think Mr. Abhijit Chatterjee is an authority on CEMS, and they have also applied for the award categories. Then we have, in fact, Team Equipment as one of our associate sponsors. We have Ecomac as our supporting sponsor. We have United Conveyor Corporation, all the way from US, supporting the conference, and Johnson Chemicals from France, of course, are supporting us as well. Now, there was a last question. Can you cite some specific examples of value which will be provided this year? So the value takeaway is explained in detail on a brochure and summit webpage. Of course, the link will be shared to all participants, which is Sox-NOx.missionenergy, Sox-NOx 2019.missionenergy.org. The second key value takeaway is the Government of India support from various ministries, which means the regulators would be present. So I'm sure they'd be open to asking questions why the deadline has been extended to 2022 and what would be the effect and what are the kind of compliances that they'd like to see. We have Environment Excellence Awards in 10 categories, again explained on the brochure. The fourth, which is very close to my heart, is one-on-one meetings. So this is not typically just a buyer and seller meet, but a policy conference. That's the reason why thermal power plants are expected to attend in large numbers, and we have such a great bit of contribution from the largest thermal power plant, that is NTPC in India. And so these one-on-one meetings with sponsors and exhibitors at the exhibits with key participants during the day and networking cocktails at the end of day one is one of the key values. The post-conference report, this is what we with pride boast about, that Mission Energy Foundation. Let me also bring in the second question. Is your part of your role liaising with Government of India policies? So here I would like to put the fact that we would be submitting a post-event report to varied ministry as a collective voice of the industry. This is because we are not exactly a government liaising agency who can advise the government on any policy changes, but we can suggest the changes to the government regulators by making some noise as a collective voice of the industry, as a requirement of the industry. And we assure you that our Director General, Shri Ashwin Kumar Khatri, who's also been named as the gasification man of India, is dedicated to the cause, and he normally goes to the parliament, meeting officers, submitting reports, and making them understand why it's a business imperative for ministry officials to support initiatives like these. Bob, that's all from me. Yes.
That's very good. The one thing I would like to emphasize is the quality of the technical presentations. We've been receiving some of last year's presentations and putting them into our newsletter. And for instance, Ravi was talking about the costs of wet FGD and dry FGD and so forth. And you had a paper last year from Clayton Erickson of Babcock. It had a very good analysis of the costs of the wet limestone FGD systems. So I think maybe next week, if we can get that Sumitomo information, we'll get the Babcock power information about costs, and maybe have a scrubber discussion next week. But I did want to emphasize the quality of the technical information, and we've written about a number of these exhibits in our newsletters, and you mentioned people like Siemens, but in addition to the overall, Siemens has tunable diode lasers for optimizing the boiler and reducing the NOx, and then of course they have various process instrumentation. So all this does fit in very well, and I think it's going to be a great conference.
Right. I'd like to also add, just today, Bob, we received a confirmation from Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, that's headed by the Director of Power, Mr. Manoj Verma, and his close team, that they'd like to join us and also make a presentation on the NOx on day 2. So we are awaiting that confirmation from BHEL. That's also one of the leading companies in India.
Oh yes, certainly. That's so I think it's going to be a great conference, and it's certainly a lot of the people that are on listening today have representatives who are going to be there, and those that don't probably should. So I'd like to thank you for all that contribution.
Excellent. And so I'd like to add here one more thing, which is we are a not-profit organization, so any contribution actually goes to the cause. But for those who are not able to attend the conference, and if they require a specific presentation from a particular sponsored conference, they can write to me and I shall make it available after taking permission from our respective sponsor. So that can be arranged, yes.
Very good. I think that we ought to talk to you and talk to Jerry Hunt of DSUA about ways that all this information can be exchanged in the future, and certainly to include you on quarterly webinars and so forth as well, and not only on the coal, but of course on the fly ash utilization, waste to energy, and the other area, the gasification, and the other areas that you're into.
Certainly, sir. In fact, today our Director General, Mr. Ashwin Kumar Khatri, was supposed to be on the webinar, but because of certain pressing needs, he has extensive travel plans for the Sox-NOx, and that's the reason I was the spokesperson for Mission Energy Foundation today. Yes.
Well, you were a very good spokesperson for them, and thank you for
Thank you, Bob. Look forward for a great and successful conference. Thanks for the support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we've got Joe Wang, who's been waiting patiently, and it's probably closer to 12 o'clock midnight. So unless he's Cinderella, he's going to be able to join us here. And Long King is the largest supplier of dry scrubber systems in the world. And Joe, I'd like to have you just kind of talk about your activities, and I'm going to kind of display what's in our coal-fired boiler decisions on the company while you talk.
Okay, thank you.
Hey,
Joe.
Bob. Sorry to interrupt. This is Paul Brand. I just had a couple real quick points before we get too far off of Ravi's points, and one question. I don't know if I could just interject those. Absolutely. And I do apologize, Joe. I won't take more than a couple minutes, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, no problem.
Sure. So I don't know, Ravi, are you still on the phone, or I guess Mr. Dalby, you may be able to speak to this as well.
I'm here. I'm here. Yes.
Yeah. So one question I had was, Ravi had mentioned, concerns with capacity factors of the units, and of course we've seen that in the United States, where base loaded units have now become where they are cycling between high load and low load over the course of the day. Is that what you see when you mention capacity factors, or is it just that the plants just aren't online at all? Is there load cycling going to be happening more?
Yeah, I'm still here. What I thought, what my reasoning on the capacity factors is that if the plant is not operating at a high capacity factor due to various issues, due to lack of availability of coal for that unit, because it's importing coal and the price of coal has gone up, and as a result it's not operating at very high capacity because it can't afford to, or because of other operational reasons, then those specific units are looking to try and seek a relief from putting any more pollution control equipment. So that's what that means.
Okay, sure.
So basically, it's not economically justifiable. But to your argument about what's going on in the United States, I mean, in the U.S. you have alternate fuels like gas that can assume a base load role. In India, there is no other base loaded fuel other than coal. I mean, with the exception of hydro, perhaps, but there's really no other. The gas is not available in any significant quantity. And renewables are fairly intermittent and not truly, a base loaded fuel. So what I meant by capacity factor is purely related to, the economics of the unit.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And then just a couple other things that you had mentioned, the high ash coal and the challenges. And I will mention that in the United States, there's also not a tremendous number of units, but lignite is a very low carbon content high ash fuel that's used down in Texas. And there are units that have very large SCRs that are very high dust applications, as well as dry scrubbers. For example, Luminance Sandow plant, which I believe unfortunately is slated to be closed, but they had a circulating dry scrubber put in there, and they also have one of the largest SCRs that you'll see, and this is on, a 750 megawatt plant, but that's also firing a very low coal fuel, so their gas flow rate and ash content is very high. So there definitely are examples, not as many, granted, that have high ash, but there are some folks that could provide, I think, some good information proven at a large scale. As far as dry scrubbers and the 600 megawatt limit you mentioned, I would caveat or add that generally the vessels themselves, it's good to try to break it up into 300 megawatts of flue gas per vessel or so. But for example, there's an Alliant Ottumwa plant that I'm involved with, and they'll actually be presenting at Dry Scrubbers Conference. That was a job we were involved with several years ago. The boiler there is nearly 800 megawatts, and they have two B&W spray dry absorbers, and so they are definitely able to handle 800 megawatt, nearly 800 megawatts of flue gas. So that, yes, the larger units are not perhaps as prevalent, but they are out there. So there's some folks that could provide some good input for those that are looking at larger applications of dry scrubbing.
Right. Yeah. Coming back to your ash question. Yes. There are units in the U.S. that have some ash content in it, but not to the extent. In India, you're talking about 40 to 45% ash in the fuel. You're talking about dust loading in the range of 70 to 80 grams per nm cube. So it's a fairly intense dust loading, and the unit that has, for SCR, for example, the most high dust unit for an SCR is that 59 grams in China, which uses incidentally a honeycomb catalyst. So you don't have the same level of experience in the US, but again, I agree with what you're saying. There is experience in the range of 18 to 20, 25, and really, if the vendors are willing to give the guarantee of performance and modifications to the design, the industry in India should not really be concerned about what the likely outcome of performance is going to be. I mean, if the industry feels confident, as the vendors are confident that they can stand behind those that kind of an ash loading, then it really shouldn't matter. So I fully agree with you that the ash loading is unique, but doesn't mean that there cannot be solutions to it, and that's why NTPC has gone on this pilot test.
He's already.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. It's gone on this pilot test just to test the effectiveness of catalyst performance under high ash Indian conditions.
Sure. That's right.
Yeah, and agree. It's that was kind of the intent, like you mentioned, Ravi, is certainly a challenge, but I think something that can be overcome, and there is at least some initial experience, although those are very high ash levels. And then speaking of ash, the only other thing I wanted to mention was that in the United States, you mentioned many of the units in India also have electrostatic precipitators already installed. And so looking at a dry scrubbing system, those can tend to create some challenges. We've had units where the electrostatic precipitator imparts a charge, so it removes a good portion of the ash, but it imparts a charge to the ash particles, and those have caused some fouling, or they kind of stick to things with the charge downstream. And so there's been challenges on some of the instruments and the flue gas ductwork, and then changing the ash loading that's going to the scrubber. In some cases, like if you have a circulating dry scrubber, actually having more ash go to that scrubber to provide kind of a base material for building up the circulating bed is actually a good thing. So that is a special consideration you may have to adjust your ESP operations to work better with the dry scrubber downstream. So, and there's plenty of examples of that being done that'll be presented at the conference.
Exactly, absolutely right.
Yeah, thank you, and sorry, Joe, to jump in there, but appreciate the chance to ask a couple questions. Thank you.
Well, not at all. I think it's very appropriate because Joe has and his company have put in more dry scrubber systems than anybody else in the world. So maybe asking Joe that question: what about high ash fuels? You've been hearing this conversation the last couple of minutes. What's your experience?
Yes, Dr.
Actually, in China, we also have some coal-fired power plant using lignite, for example, and also some CFB boiler burning a very high ash field. So actually, we have plenty of experience to deal with this kind of flue gas condition. Yeah.
And you've presented some of these papers on all this, here. So we have a whole lot of information that you presented in our hot topic hours and so forth here on some of these plants. And then you also have information units on steel and some of these other things. What is the dust loading on some of, say, on bow steel and some of these things? How does that compare to the dust loadings you're getting in the coal plants?
Actually, you said the steel industry, especially for the thinner plant, the dust loading, the inner dust concentration is not too high. Because most of the thinner plants, they have the ESP in front, upstream, so the dust concentration, I think, is most of them below the 100 milligram. It's not so high. But for CFB boilers, the flue gas condition is not so good. Sometimes the ash concentration, the inner ash, can higher to 50 gram per normal cubic meters. Yeah, so it's very high.
So you're not concerned about the, say, an Indian coal and dealing with that with your CFB scrubber? No,
not really. But if there is a pre-ESP system, you only need one field or two fields to remove 80% or 96% of the dust before, and that will be benefit for the both the income of the sailing of the fly ash itself, and to reduce the solvent, reduce the hydrogen line used for CDS system. So it will be benefit. But if you don't have the ESP in front, and that's okay, the CDS system itself can manage that, because you can imagine that in the CFB reactor itself, the outlet of the CFB reactor is higher to the 1,000 gram. So for the emission figures, it is not a problem.
In other words, you're dealing with a lot more solids anyway once you've got the lime in there.
Yeah. And I think I can move to my part, and I want to introduce a little bit about my company and what we did for the CDS system in China. Is that okay?
Sure.
Right, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bob, and thank you, everyone. And this is Joe Wang from Longjing Environment Technology, and Longjing is 100% owned by Fujian Longqing. Longqing is the first publicly listed company in air pollutant control industry in China, and we have more than 6,000 employees, and we focus on the flue gas treatment for 48 years right now. And for CDS system, for dry FGD system, we have experience for 18 years right now. Actually, Bob has already introduced a little bit about our dry FGD system. We have some special, we will say, the milestone. For example, we are the one who built the first 660 megawatt power plant units equipped with CDS system. We are using the two scrubbers for the one units. That is a Hanfeng project. Yeah. And also we are the first one in China to use a dried system to deal with the steel industry flue gas treatment, especially the cinder plant. Actually, I think it's something different in China compared to the situation in India. It's that the regulation here and the requirement here is a little bit stricter, and the clients themselves, for example, they are more eager to get the flue gas the emission limits lower to maintain their to prolong their life and to enhance their competitiveness in the market. For example, the ultra low emission control, it is not a regulation from the government. It is actually a requirement, but originally start from the client itself, which means that the first ultra low emission control who raised this requirement is not the government, it's the client itself. They wanted because they wanted a reduce more pollutants from the flue gas to maintain the capacity of their online electricity. So they
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So what I want to say is that our dried flue gas treatment technology is accompanied along with the requirement of the Chinese market. And I remember that we presented the presentation in 2015 during the DSUA. And then we are talking about the ultra low emission control, which means that the SO2 concentration should be below 35 milligrams per normal cubic meters, and NOx concentration should be below 50 milligrams, and the PM, the dust, below 5 to 10 milligrams. So it's very strict. But in the past, I would say 3 years, most of the coal-fired power plant, they already finished the retrofit of the flue gas treatment system to compliance with this requirement. And right now, from the last year, some of the other industry, especially the steel industry, they also followed the requirement from the coal-fired power plant, and now the other industries, they also need to compliance with the requirement. We said 35, 50, and 10.
Wow.
So that's different. I think it's totally different, not only compared to the situation in India. Maybe it's different from the other countries, other parts in the world. Yeah, and it is not for the single. It is not for the company or industry. It's for all the units, which means that every single unit, if you cannot meet the requirement, then maybe you should reduce your production or simply shut down your plant. So
shut down the plant.
Yes, if you cannot meet the requirement.
Yes, Dr. Joe. In fact, Bob, with your permission, I'd like to thank Dr. Joe. And I would like to also invite Dr. Joe to India, primarily to visit the PUP plants at NTPC, and I'm sure they would have some learnings from you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think another thing that's important here is the dry FGD byproduct experience that Longking has. We've written a lot about that, but I think you're making bricks and other usable products. It seems to me that that is something that the Indian government would be wanting to hear.
Yes.
Boy, you're right. And I remember that several years ago, I presented something about the byproduct utilization. Actually, in China right now, because the dry FGD system portion is becoming bigger and bigger. Bob, we just talked before the meetings, and then in the past, especially for the coal-fired power plant, the wet scrubber is much more than the dry scrubber. It's about a 95%, and the dried only 5%. But right now, the dry system is getting more and more popular, especially for the ultra-low emission control, the retrofit project. And it raised up to, I think, about 10%, because dry system have some advantages that the wet system cannot get. For example, no wastewater, and can remove the SO3 and so on. But one of the biggest issues is that the dry system byproduct, how to deal with that. We are thinking about this question 10 years ago. So we organized a team with more than 20 people to do the research and to do the utilization in China. Right now, actually, we are not only to use the byproduct for construction materials, somehow like bricks. We also to use the byproduct here for some special usage, and most of the usage we combined with the requirement and with the situation nearby the project itself, and almost all the utilization we need to do the special analysis of the flue gas condition itself and the byproduct composition itself. So it is not easy to say it or to present, but we found some of the very major utilization now in China. So I think if have opportunities, maybe I can show you something about this, and everybody here are very welcome to visit it. Our plant, and I think if you come to China and to see the plant and to see the utilization of the byproducts on site here, and you can get more information. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joe.
One last question I had there, Joe, was what's the title of your paper going to be at DSUA?
You mean last week, next week?
Yes, yeah.
Next week, I will present a paper to talking about the capability of the particular matters removal for CDS system with fiber filter.
Very good. So we'll be looking forward to that as well. And
yeah, thank you, Paul.
I'd like to thank you for staying up past midnight in China to participate here. And
thank you, Dr. Joe.
Yeah, I think what Scott Affolt's going to be our last presenter here, but before I'm going to take just a minute before we do that to bring up Ken Rogers' presentation last year at DSUA. So we've got it on the home page here, and so it's something that's going into our intelligence system. So this is, hopefully we're going to bring it up right here. And so I think, Ken, are you on the conference with us at this point in time?
I don't see him on the attendee list right now, Bob.
Okay, so we'll just kind of skip through that. But I do think that they have done prognostics on a manual sort of a basis for atomizers. But I think that kind of leads us in to Scott's paper, does it not, Scott? Because it, here's somebody they've got all sorts of problems with atomizers, and it has to be organized in such a way to lower the total cost of ownership. And I think that's a good segue into Scott Alfeld's presentation. And
yeah, definitely. So, Bob, why don't you cue up the PowerPoint there, and I'll jump in.
Okay, sounds good.
So while we're getting that up, I'm going to talk a little bit about the opportunities for applying predictive analytics to air pollution control equipment, and predictive analytics have been used in a lot of rotating equipment for many years, things like turbines and what have you. And but what I see happening here in the future is applying some of these same predictive analytics solutions to air pollution control, both equipment and processes. So Bob, go to the next slide there. A little bit about Exemplar Energy. Myself and my business partner, Deepak Ajuria, represent Exemplar. We do some consulting. A couple of important points to highlight here. As far as technology liaison, a lot of discussion on India. We've done a lot of work in the India market, specifically by liaisoning with Western technology companies to find local partners or technology transfer partners within the India market. We talked a lot about India. It is a big growing market for pollution control technology, but it's important to have a local partner, and in many cases have a local manufacturing capability within India, or else you'll never be able to compete with the prices. So we work with a lot of Western companies and find them local partners through licensing arrangements or technology transfer arrangements. So that's a little bit relevant to some of the earlier discussion. What I'm here to talk about today is more of our data analytics area. We do a lot of work in helping develop digital strategies for OEMs, but we do a lot of work using advanced pattern recognition and predictive analytics, which is what I'll be talking about here today. Bob, next slide, please. Bob, click one more time as well while I'm talking. So predictive analytics for pollution control is really around using machine learning methods where we can learn the normal relationships between multiple parameters in the process or in the equipment, and then we can make predictions on what each of those parameters should be if that either equipment or process is operating normally, and compare that to each of those actual values in real time. And the difference between that observed value and the predicted value is what's called a residual. And that residual should be 0. It should have normal predictive properties. And we can use that residual to very accurately detect any abnormal behavior in each of these parameters. Next click, Bob. The benefits for using predictive analytics for APC equipment really around two areas. The first area is around equipment reliability. There's a lot of equipment involved in the APC process, and these kinds of predictive analytics methods can detect very early on any pending equipment issues. And so the earlier that you detect them, we can identify the cause, provide some insights into the time to act, and of course the objective is to correct that problem before there's any threshold impact on the performance or some compliance violation. And so next click, Bob. The other area is around using predictive analytics to monitor for the process performance. And again, in the same method, we're looking at the process variables and detecting very early on if those process variables are normal or abnormal, and that could give us an indication of whether the process is working properly. This could allow us to enhance or maintain the optimal emissions reductions that we're trying to achieve, but it can also be used to monitor and hopefully optimize or lower the reagent costs so that we're making sure that we're really operating at that right molar level, if you will. Next slide. And one more click, Bob. The main difference between what predictive analytics is and normal trend monitoring is each of the parameters that we're monitoring has a normal range of variation. It could be the temperature is higher at higher load and lower at lower load, whatever that could be. And one more click, Bob. But as we look at normal thresholds, we have to create these threshold limits that can accommodate that normal process variation. So in this case, when that temperature exceeds that threshold, that's an anomaly detection. One more click. Using predictive analytics, effectively what we're doing is we're putting those temperature parameters or whatever the parameters we're interested in the context of how it's being operated. And what that means is we can create then a dynamic threshold that takes into consideration how that particular asset is operating, and that allows us to have a much tighter threshold, and that allows us to then, as a result, detect any kind of an abnormality or anomaly much earlier than you could otherwise. And so the real value of predictive analytics is accurate detection and, most importantly, earlier detection. Next slide. The other important thing is that usually when you're monitoring just trends, could be in your PI system or whatever, you're just looking at each individual parameter independently. And so in this particular case, your reagent flow may be normal and your temperature control may be normal. But Bob, now click one more time. If we look at the combination of these two parameters, we can see that, well, even though each parameter individually is within the operating threshold that's acceptable, when you look at the combination of these two, it's not. And this is what pattern recognition and predictive analytics can do. It can look at not just two dimensions, but almost an infinite number of dimensions of different parameters. And that provides us the ability to identify these kinds of relationships that are abnormal much earlier than you could otherwise. The software company that we work with a lot is called Expert Microsystems, and their software solution is called SureSets. And that's the basis of...
Can you repeat? Yes, Scott, sorry to interrupt. Can you repeat? The software company you work?
The company is called Expert Microsystems. It's on that slide in the lower right-hand corner. And the product itself is called SureSets.
Right, thank you.
All right, next slide, if you would. So in the context of using advanced pattern recognition or APR to dry scrubbers, one of the challenges is there's a lot of variables that impact the performance of the FGD process. Whether the unit is at full load or cycling or at low load, the flue gas temperatures are continually changing. The ambient conditions can change pretty dramatically. Coal properties and the water quality that you're mixing your slurries with, all of those have a big impact on the quality or the performance of the process. And as a result, it's very difficult to predict what that performance should be. So Bob, one more click. With respect to using APR for dry scrubbers, there's really kind of two areas that I envision we could take advantage of predictive analytics. One is on monitoring all of the key equipment. So we can use these predictive analytics methods to monitor the reliability of the equipment. That could be the reagent feeder system or the water treatment or nozzles, Bob, as you mentioned, or any other BOP, balance of plant equipment, things like pumps, motors, and valves. If these kinds of equipments fail, then it's going to impact the performance and the reliability and the availability of the dry scrubber system. So we can use predictive analytics to monitor in real time and detect any kind of problems at the earliest point so that they can be detected and repaired before they become a real problem. One more click. Of course, the other aspect is the process monitoring. So we can monitor the flows and the pressures and the reagent properties, things like resistivity or dew point, if that's being online monitored, the inlet and outlet emissions and the water quality, all the process variables we can also monitor in real time and detect when those process variables are not normal in the context of how that plant or how that APC equipment is being operated. And so those are going to be the two applications that I would envision for dry scrubbers. If you go to the next slide, Of course, this is a specific example, but not only are we using the predictive analytics to detect these abnormalities, we can use the symptoms that we're monitoring, or the anomalies and the combinations of what those anomalies are telling us, to also automatically diagnose the problem. SureSense has the capability, it's called the virtual subject matter expert. So instead of relying on manual subject matter experts, we can capture and leverage and automate that expert knowledge, so that when the software sees the combination of different symptoms, we can provide some insights into, well, what the likely cause would be, and that can be very beneficial with respect to the repair. One more click, Bob. So here's a little decision tree for, this is actually for a pump, some bearings, and you can see that these relationships and these decision trees can be quite complex, but once we capture that, we can then integrate it into our monitoring platform, and the platform will automatically sift through all the different combinations and basically derive some probability-based diagnostic or cause for that problem. One more click, Bob. The last piece of the puzzle is, not only can we detect a problem, provide some insights into what the cause might be, but we can provide some context into the remaining time to act. How much time do I have before that piece of equipment or that process exceeds some limit? And that can be helpful for planning the maintenance around that. Perhaps I can make it till the next outage that's in 3 weeks away or 1 month away. And this is all based on the degradation rate of the symptoms that we're monitoring. So Bob, if you do one more click, you can see if the degradation rate in this particular one starts to decline, we detect an anomaly very early on. But one more click, Bob, we can then use this degradation rate to extrapolate effectively, well, how long before where we are right now until we meet that degradation limit value. And that represents the RUL, or the remaining useful life. And that can be then updated every time we get new information, might be every 5 or 10 minutes. We can provide an updated remaining time to act for the operator that can provide him some guidance with respect to how much longer do I have. Next slide. Now, all of these principles, we talked about dry scrubbers as an example, but, and as I mentioned, all these principles are being applied now on most of the rotating equipment at power plants, but it's not really being applied to a very large extent on any of the back end. And so my proposition is, well, let's take some of these advanced analytics and start to apply them not just on each individual piece of APC equipment, like the SCR or the dust control, the precipitator, the baghouse, or the scrubber, but one more click, Bob. Look at the whole context and look at how that whole APC train is performing. Because as you all know, it's all interrelated. You know, what happens in the boiler impacts the SCR, and the ash impacts the performance of the precipitator. There were some comments today about the scrubber impacting the precipitator. And so if you look at each one of these processes independently, you're never going to be able to really truly optimize. And so my vision would be is that we can use these predictive analytics methods to not only improve the availability and performance of each individual pollution control device or equipment, but look at it even more holistically, both in terms of reliability and performance. And then one more slide, Bob. All right, just to kind of conclude here. So again, my feeling is we can use the predictive analytics to not only detect anomalies in the APC equipment with respect to reliability and performance, but before they can impact the compliance. These kinds of methods are very sensitive and very accurate, and typically will find problems before things will be triggered in the DCS system, as an example. And this gives the operators time to actually either repair or correct the problem before it becomes a compliance issue. This concept of a virtual subject matter expert, I know Bob's a big advocate of kind of capturing the wisdom of the IoT. Here's an opportunity where we can capture this knowledge and embed it into these solutions that we can then automate some of the diagnostic based on the monitoring of multiple symptoms. This will allow us to much more cost effectively and more quickly identify what the problem is. And the last piece, of course, is providing some time context. How much longer do I have? Whether you have a week, an hour, or a month, that information can be very helpful for your operator to know exactly how much of a priority it can be. That allows you to then better plan any kind of maintenance, and instead of you having to expedite parts or crews to do the maintenance, you can plan around that if you know you've got a longer time before there's a problem. And the bottom line is, by combining these kinds of predictive analytics, we can really increase the pollution control availability of these plants, because if they're restricted from a compliance standpoint, if the scrubber goes down, the plant can't operate, then we don't want to have those kinds of things happen. You're going to need to have these kinds of solutions that will both maintain the availability that's required, but they can also lower the overall operating costs by making sure that these processes are performing at the optimum level. So anyway, I know it was a long discussion here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk very briefly. Bob, maybe go to the last slide here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me via phone or email, and I'd be happy to discuss them further. If there's any questions now, Bob, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yes, Bob, thank you. With your permission, I'd like to ask Scott a question.
Surely.
Scott, hi, this is Dalvi from India. In the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that you have some Indian partners. It's very crucial to have some partners in India, primarily with the manufacturing setup to facilitate. So if it's not classified information, can you kindly share who those partners are who may benefit from the Sox-NOx conference? Yes, please.
Unfortunately, I can't disclose because those are all covered under non-disclosure agreements. My business partner, Deepak Ajuria, is online, but Deepak, I don't know if you have anything that you might be able to add to that India discussion and technology transfer that might be helpful.
Right. Thank you.
Deepak, are you on the line? Maybe he's not.
So I believe next time I'll invite you in India, and I'm sure we can have a tour around one of our largest partners, NTPC, as well.
Yeah, we're very familiar with NTPC, and we're also work with a lot of the large EPC companies and equipment vendors who are looking to get different kinds of Western technology to offer.
Yes.
So, you would certainly recognize some of the large names for sure.
Certainly. So India is a land of opportunities. Most welcome. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, Scott, that I'd like to explore this huge, I think, opportunity with your SureSense here. You're not only have an ongoing operating program and prognostics, but you are actually generating the information by which you can communicate with the experts around the world to keep updating the quality of the prognostics and so forth. In other words, you're automating this wisdom, but the wisdom keeps improving in things too. And so, and the more information that's being generated, say you're doing this on 50 Indian plants, and all that information, say on atomizers and how the atomizers are operating at 50 different plants, Ken Rogers at Omega Atomizers can be rethinking, some of the factors and so forth that go into your software program to improve them. So it could be a never and always, a continually improving situation, could it not?
Oh yeah. In fact, interestingly, we did some work with EPRI many years ago around trying to capture what's called asset fault signatures. So these are the symptoms that go wrong when a piece of equipment starts to fail. The temperature goes up and the pressure goes down and the flow stays the same. What does that mean for a pump? and we actually characterized about 400 different asset fault signatures for different kinds of power equipment, and the idea was to then continue to capture and expand that library and of fault signatures, and so that information would be made available to the EPRI members. And so we're continuing to kind of develop that concept. Interestingly, we actually had some discussions at a while back with NTPC, because they were actually interested in trying to incorporate that concept of which we started. And I don't know where that is right now. You know, as you know, it can be difficult to deal with the large government entities like that. So
PSU, that's right, public sector units. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The tendering and everything. Yes.
But that's exactly what the concept is to collect this information and then make it available and keep leveraging it and keep expanding it.
So it would seem to me that just to summarize this, that with the SureSense and with cloud-based software that can communicate this, that the Indian power plants could operate with all the world's most expert people supporting them at a very low cost, just by adopting these technologies and making sure the cloud-based systems parcel out the information to, that needs to go to Omega atomizers, goes to Omega atomizers and so forth. But it seems like India can immediately come up to speed with the latest world's information and knowledge.
Yeah,
absolutely,
no doubt.
sir. Yeah.
No doubt. No doubt.
Bob,
I agree. Yeah.
Oh, Deepak, are you on? I see there. Did you have some comments? So Deepak is my business partner and has done a lot of the work in India. Deepak, are you there?
Hi, Deepak.
Yeah. I think I'm saying Darvish. I think
that's right. Yeah. Yes.
I'm aware of your conference. I know Ashwin for a long time. And,
yes, sir.
Yeah. So basically, I think what we have done. I think the biggest dilemma U.S. companies have, which probably is very important from Jerry's perspective also, OEM and technology providers who think India is too far away from perspective of doing business, who are not able to understand how to do business in these parts of the world. We are enabling them by finding them the right partners. That's what we do. Like Scott explained earlier, we have done licensing of technology. We are working on a JV right now with a major Indian company. And this is not only from US, we have done 2 European transactions, European companies going into India. So, and your conference is pretty famous, as you said. When Bob reached on talking about this, I talked to a couple of the guys with whom we deal. Everybody is aware of your conference, and so I think you will find most of them in the conference. But Jerry, the message for your DSUA. I think there are companies like, just to give you an example, there could be a small company maybe doing $10 million of business here in North America, who has done a lot of business in a particular segment, and with the declining market, they are stagnating right now. We enable those companies who want to go beyond the USA into a bigger market, and they want to understand how to do business in those markets without losing their IP, without losing their business. We find them credible partners where they can cash from the technologies which they are not here in North America, which is not enabling them to grow in North America right now. So we are doing a lot of those transactions with small and medium-sized companies also.
Right. Deepak, I have a question for you pertaining to the India market. For example, leaders like BHEL. There has been a recent change in the top management with Mr. Atul Sopti, chairman of BHEL, retiring, and Mr. Nalin Singhal now, the new chairman. So have they been a bit of hiccups or pitfalls with top management changes and decision making?
I don't think so. Like BHEL, obviously, they're a government organization. They have
decisions by committees. So basically, there's no single individual who takes a decision, right? So basically, everything moves slow. Moves slow in that system. So what we find is that as long as they are convinced that it meets their purpose, like chairman is one of top signatory. Okay, he has to say yes, but he is not be a roadblock. And this gentleman is a nice gentleman, the new chairman.
Yes. Dr. Nalin Singh, yes.
He comes with plenty of PSU experience. He's not like from government who has never worked in industry. He was chairman of ISPTC before that, and I think he worked in CEL and also he knows quite a lot of things, and he knows how to run the companies. So I'm sure it won't impact anything.
Right, sir.
Well, I think this has been a very good session. What I would like to do is I'm going to start talking about some of the markets. I imagine many of you are no longer going to be available, so feel free to click off. But I'm going to spend another 10 or 15 minutes on the markets. But I will be getting back to you within, about coordinating some very small webinars next week to get into some of these details. Again, with these recordings to be posted to both conferences. So, for those of you who have to move on, but for those who want to stay around and ask some questions, then I'm going to go over the markets a little bit for another 15 minutes or so for those who do want to stay. But again, thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Bob, a suggestion from me is if the program presentation and our Mission Energy Foundation website and the Sox-NOx conference website can be shared with everyone, for those who can join us and essentially ask questions or join us for the years to come. That was a suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everybody.
I'm glad everybody's been able to participate. I'm just going to again spend another 15 minutes or so for anybody who wants to stay on the line, but it is going to be recorded. And so basically, just to look at the total picture, we have the various market reports that that project how big the FGD market is and the precipitator market, NOx, and so forth. But then we actually track all the projects and how many coal-fired plants are going to be everywhere in the world. And so to put things in perspective, between 2000 and 2018, world coal-fired capacity doubled to over 2 million megawatts. Now there's an additional 570,000 megawatts in construction or planning. So in the 2000 to 2018 timeframe, the U.S. and Europe retired on the average of 15,000 megawatts of capacity. So the net additional capacity is over 700,000 megawatts during the period, or 39,000 megawatts per year. So contrary to what the impression you get about coal-fired power plants around the world retiring, the bottom line is that they are growing, and there's another 570,000 megawatts of new capacity in the planning stage. Now, some of those will be retired, they'll be offset by some retirements. But on the whole, coal-fired power plants represents a larger investment for combust flow and treat equipment than any of the other fuel generation markets or power generation markets. And we do have a forecast. It was mentioned earlier that there's 300 or 400 plants in India that are going to be putting in FGD and so forth. We track every one of the plants in the world that has whether it's industrial or utility. And then relative to utility, we summarize such as this, that what Africa is going to be doing, Botswana, Egypt, Kenya, and there is activity going on in all these different African countries, and that's going to be a fairly significant market. So anyway, this is what we do in this tracking system, and you can go in just to India and get if you go and click on India, for instance, that you get.
Before you finish, I had a question.
Sure.
This is Pramod.
Sure, absolutely. Fire away.
My question is that in India, question is about India, and that is, I'm quite familiar with the various segments and also the private power, but there appears to be a different standard that is being used in the utility industry and for industrial power. The RFQs that we have seen out here, it basically is that on industrial power, the requirement for SO2 control is between 98 and 99% SO2 removal. Then for the NTPC type projects, the larger utilities, it's 50% and 50% removal with only sodium bicarbonate removal, which really nobody does in the US anymore. And the last element is that, and it is somewhere around 70, 80%. So there seems to be different SO2 regulations that are being applied. And my question is that it's very tough because for private power, it only leaves one solution, and that would be like a sodium hydroxide scrubbing system or a wet limestone system, but you don't apply that for 50,000 CFM applications. So I don't know if you can comment on that at all, or.
Yeah, I think that we have the tiers of requirement given the age and size of the units, and there's a lot of these units that do have modest enough requirements that things like DSI and the sodium-based additives will be sufficient.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So that and we are actually in our utility alert, we're addressing each of those things on a weekly basis as to we were reviewing these regulations continually here, and there's a number of these summaries, and then they do appear in our reports as well. One thing that I think is important too, and it's just get this one up. The
yes.
In India here, by the way, these are the this particular one covers the various different exhibitions at the stands that are going to be at Sox-NOx. So you've got let's see, where is this now? Sorry, maybe that was the other one. Anyway, we have I think it's the one before this that does have that, but there are a number of very good exhibitors at the Sox-NOx conference.
That's right, sir.
And and let's see, one other thing I wanted to pull up there too, maybe just go back here, is this August 23rd. And so well, I guess I won't take the time on it, but in the weekly alerts, we have been covering who the exhibitors are going to be. The other thing that we covered in one of these recently is the fact that we've done a study of called the sustainability rating, and it basically is a unique way of looking at life quality. And for Indians that do not have anyway, for Indians that don't have the electricity, for instance, and take this kind of extreme situation with the way we rate quality of life. An Indian without electricity that lived to be 90 would be rated as having a better life than an Indian who lived to be 88 but had electricity and enjoyed all the benefits of a large economy, or a robust economy. So anyway, that's another thing that we have there. But anyway, I guess the last thing I just wanted to say there is that we are tracking all this on a weekly basis, and we're tracking it on a monthly basis with all these sorts of newsletters and things that are in this in the system. So, for instance, on the FGD and DSUA newsletter, here's our August newsletter, and we do get into the speakers and things here. So, Ecomac and United Conveyor and Envia, Johnson Chemicals, Steam Equipments, and EPP, who just, I meant to show that today too. EPP does have a license with Plasticon, and will be providing FRP vessels in India. And so then here, the speakers, there's an impressive group of speakers that are going to be at the Sox-NOx conference as well. And here's some of the stuff you're talking about on the implementation and in the phasing and so forth here. But there are different timelines, and it's a fairly complex mix of things. So these are and then we are getting into the individual producers such as Tata and so forth here. But anyway, this is all part of the system that we. And then here's an interview we just did with Thermax, and and then so these are some of the things that we're covering in the conference here. So
So the interview you did, Bob, was with Naveen Sadhu of Thermax. Is he on the webinar? He was planning to join us.
Yeah, he did.
Thermax. Naveen, are you there?
He's not with us right now, but he was in the webinar earlier.
Right, because we have approached Mr. Tony Krishnan personally, and he had promised to support. He's the CEO for Thermax. Yes, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah, so there's a lot of good exhibitions here, or exhibits, and so I'm sure that people who attend will benefit from all these people. And we did try to put in the links to some of these people, like Ramakrishnan here of EPP and so forth. So we will be getting back to you relative to next week. And see if there are some opportunities for some very small webinars next week that would be supportive of the conferences coming up following the week. Hello.
Bob, I think someone's trying to speak to us.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
No, I think there's a call interrupted, speaking in a local language. Yes, Bob.
Okay. So I think that's probably enough for today. I'd like to thank everybody for staying with it, and we'll look forward to interfacing with everybody in the future.
Thank you so much, Bob, and I'd like to invite all participants to please recommend our Sox-NOx 2019 Mission Energy Foundation Conference. Thank you. It's on the 12th and 13th of September. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you. And this is Bob McIlvaine signing off for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.